Deep beneath the shattered streets of Berlin, a dying dictator raged. The year was 1945. April was coming to a close. The once mighty Third Reich was reduced to rubble, mirroring the ruined city above. Adolf Hitler, the man who had promised his people a 1,000-year empire, was trapped in his underground bunker, facing his own inevitable end. The air was thick with the stench of fear and sweat. The Führer's inner circle, their faces etched with anxiety, huddled around maps, their uniforms hanging loosely on their emaciated frames. The once boisterous laughter that had filled these rooms was now replaced by a chilling silence broken only by the distant rumble of Russian artillery. Hitler, his face a mask of defiance and despair, refused to accept the reality that was closing in. The dream of Aryan supremacy, the vision of a new world order was crumbling around him. His armies were in tatters, his cities reduced to ashes. The Allied forces, a relentless tide of steel and fury, were closing in from the west. And from the east the vengeful Red Army was at the gates of Berlin, eager to settle the score for the millions of Soviet citizens sacrificed on the altar of Nazi ambition. The world held its breath. The war that had consumed continents, that had devoured tens of millions of lives, was entering its final act. The stage was set for a last desperate stand. A Gotterdammerung, a twilight of the gods, played out in the ruins of a once proud city. The noose was tightening around Berlin. For weeks the Red Army had been advancing relentlessly, their ranks swollen with soldiers and civilians alike, all united in their burning desire for revenge. The stories of Nazi atrocities, of villages razed and families slaughtered, had preceded them like a chilling wind. The Germans, their forces depleted by years of relentless warfare, fought with the desperation of the damned. But against the overwhelming might of the Red Army, their resistance was crumbling. The once invincible Wehrmacht, reduced to a shadow of its former self, was now bolstered by old men and young boys, hastily trained and ill-equipped. The streets of Berlin were a testament to the ferocity of the fighting. Buildings lay in ruins, their facades scarred by bullets and shrapnel. The air was thick with the acrid smell of cordite and the stench of death. The relentless bombardment had transformed the once elegant boulevards into treacherous labyrinths of rubble and debris. Amidst the chaos and carnage, ordinary Berliners, men, women and children, were caught in a maelstrom not of their making. They huddled in cellars and makeshift shelters, their faces etched with fear and exhaustion. The lucky ones had managed to escape the city, fleeing westward in the hope of finding sanctuary from the advancing Red Army. But for those who remained, there was no escape. Their fate was now inextricably tied to that of their Führer, who had led them to the brink of annihilation. The sounds of battle echoed through the shattered streets, a terrifying symphony of destruction. The rumble of tank tracks, the staccato bursts of machine gun fire, the earth-shuddering explosions of artillery, the soundtrack to Armageddon. The sky glowed an eerie orange from the countless fires raging throughout the city, casting long dancing shadows on the rubble-strewn streets. The air was thick with dust and smoke, making it difficult to breathe. Impossible to ignore the stench of death that permeated everything. The heart of the Third Reich, once a symbol of power and might, was now a city of ghosts. The few remaining civilians moved through the ruins like wraiths, their faces gaunt, their eyes hollowed out by fear and hunger. They had seen too much death, too much destruction. The Nazi flags that had once adorned every building now hung limp and tattered, symbols of a regime in its death throes. The grand avenues, once thronged with goose-stepping soldiers and cheering crowds, were now eerily deserted, save for the occasional patrol of weary German soldiers and the ubiquitous rubble. The city that had once pulsated with life, with music, laughter, and the energy of millions, was now a silent tomb. The only sounds were the sounds of destruction the cries of the wounded and the prayers of the dying. In the heart of this inferno, in the depths of his bunker, Adolf Hitler prepared for his final stand. He knew the end was near, yet he clung to a delusional hope, a belief that somehow, miraculously, he could still snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. The seeds of Germany's destruction, sown in Nazi ideology, grew into a monstrous reality. Early victories now seemed like a distant dream. Blitzkrieg foundered in Russia, bogged down in a war Germany couldn't win. The turning point came in the bitter winter of 1942–43, amidst Stalingrad's ruins. The German Sixth Army was encircled and destroyed, shattering the myth of invincibility. From that moment, the tide turned against the Third Reich. Allied bombing reduced German cities to rubble, crippling industry and morale. In June 1944, the Allies gained a foothold in Europe, spelling doom for Hitler. The liberation of Paris in August signaled the beginning of the end for Nazi-occupied Europe. Yet even as the walls closed in, Hitler refused to surrender. He clung to the belief he could still turn the tide, even as his armies crumbled. Nowhere was the ferocity of the war felt more keenly than on the Eastern Front. From the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea, a titanic struggle raged between two ideological titans. The vast plains became a charnel house littered with millions of bodies. The Eastern Front was a war of annihilation fueled by hatred and ideology. For the Nazis, the Slavic peoples were Untermenschen, fit only for slavery or extermination. Their land was Lebensraum, to be seized and colonized. The atrocities committed by the Nazis fueled a burning desire for revenge in the hearts of the Soviet people. The Red Army emerged as a formidable force driven by patriotism and fury. They endured unimaginable hardships but never broke. With victory near, they unleashed their rage on Berlin. At their head was Joseph Stalin, the ruthless dictator who transformed the Soviet Union into a military juggernaut. In the dying days of the Third Reich, with the Red Army poised to unleash its final assault on Berlin, Hitler made a fateful decision. He appointed General Walter Wenck, a relatively young and untested commander, to lead a desperate counterattack against the advancing Soviet forces. Wenck, a decorated officer known for his tactical acumen and his unwavering loyalty to the Führer, was tasked with the impossible: to stem the red tide and buy time for Hitler to negotiate a separate peace with the Western Allies. Wenck's army group Vistula, cobbled together from the remnants of shattered divisions and hastily assembled Volkssturm units, was hopelessly outmatched. They faced the full might of Marshal Georgy Zhukov's First Belarusian Front, a battle-hardened force equipped with thousands of tanks and artillery pieces. It was a suicide mission, a forlorn hope launched against an enemy that outnumbered and outgunned them by a factor of 10-1. But Wenck, a true believer in the Nazi cause, embraced his orders with fanatical zeal. He knew the odds were stacked against him, that victory was all but impossible. Yet he was determined to obey his Führer's commands, to fight to the death, to sacrifice himself and his men in a futile attempt to save a regime that was already doomed. He rallied his weary troops, promising them victory or death, and prepared to launch his ill-fated counter-offensive. The fate of Berlin and of the Third Reich hung in the balance. On the outskirts of Berlin, a desperate gamble was about to be played. General Wenck rallied his men, a motley crew of veterans, recruits, old men and boys, united to defend their homeland from the advancing Red Army. Operation Solstice was their final throw of the dice. The initial attack caught the Soviets by surprise. Wenck's forces fought with unexpected ferocity. Tanks rumbled forward, their guns spitting fire. For a brief moment, Wenck's dream seemed within reach. News of the counteroffensive spread through the besieged city. Could this be the turning point? Could Wenck be the saviour they had been praying for? Hope, however fleeting, flickered amidst the darkness. The respite, however, was to be short-lived. Marshal Zhukov, the architect of the Red Army's triumph, was not a man to be trifled with. He reacted to the German counter-offensive with characteristic ruthlessness and speed. Fresh divisions, held in reserve for the final assault on Berlin, were hurled into the fray. The skies over the battlefield turned black as wave after wave of Soviet bombers pounded German positions. The ground trembled under the weight of thousands of tanks, their guns transforming the landscape into a churning inferno of steel and fire. The sheer weight of the Soviet counterattack proved overwhelming. Wenck's forces, outnumbered and outgunned, fought with the courage of the damned, but they were slowly being ground down. Their tanks, outmatched by the ubiquitous T-34S, were picked off one by one. Their infantry, their ranks thinned with every passing hour, fought on with grim determination, knowing that they were fighting a losing battle. The dream of Operation Solstice, of breaking through to Berlin, was fading with the setting sun. Within the Führerbunker, deep beneath the Reich Chancellery, the mood was one of grim resignation. Hitler, his face a mask of rage and despair, railed against his generals, accusing them of treachery and incompetence. His dreams of a 1,000-year Reich lay shattered around him, the price of his ambition paid for in the blood of millions. The news from the front was uniformly bleak. Wenck's army, despite its initial successes, was being pushed back. The Red Army was now within sight of the Reichstag, the symbolic heart of the Third Reich. The end was nigh. Berlin, once the vibrant heart of the Third Reich, was now a city of the dead. The relentless bombardment had transformed its grand avenues into a nightmarish landscape of rubble. The Red Army fought street by street, block by block, towards the heart of the city. The defenders, a mix of Wehrmacht soldiers, SS fanatics and Volkssturm units, fought desperately. They knew they stood no chance, yet they fought on, fueled by propaganda and terror. The battle for Berlin was a brutal clash amidst the ruins of a once great city. Amidst the chaos, individual stories of courage and despair emerged. A young German nurse, her Red Cross armband, a stark contrast to the destruction, tended to the wounded with unwavering dedication. A grizzled Soviet sergeant risked his life to pull a terrified German child from the rubble. In the heart of the city, a group of German soldiers made their last stand in a bombed-out apartment building. They fought on, their courage fueled by loyalty, despair, and a desperate hope of survival. Their final moments were a microcosm of the tragedy that had engulfed their nation. From the Soviet perspective, too, there were stories of extraordinary heroism and heartbreaking loss. A young lieutenant led his platoon in a daring assault on a German machine gun nest. A seasoned tank commander wept openly as he surveyed the devastation around him. The battle for Berlin left an indelible mark on all who witnessed its horrors.
Attention! Fall in! Fall out!
General Walter Wenck faced a daunting task. His army group Vistula, a patchwork force, stood between the advancing Red Army and the collapsing Third Reich. Old men and boys, their faces etched with fear, stood alongside seasoned veterans. Their mission, a suicide run towards Berlin to relieve their besieged Führer. Theirs was a race against time, a desperate gamble with the fate of a nation hanging in the balance. Every bombed-out town they passed served as a grim reminder of the enemy's relentless advance. The air was thick with the stench of cordite, the rumble of distant artillery fire, a constant reminder of the impending clash. They had heard whispers of the atrocities committed by the advancing Red Army. For many, the thought of falling into Soviet hands was a fate worse than death. They marched eastward, driven by a sense of duty and the primal instinct to survive. Theirs was an army on the edge, fueled by desperation, loyalty, and fear. The fate of a nation hung in the balance. Wenck's weary troops pushed eastward, facing annihilation. Marshal Zhukov's forces pressed their attack from the east. To the west, the American and British armies advanced steadily. Wenck's army, caught between the hammer and the anvil, faced annihilation. Supplies dwindled, ammunition ran low, and reinforcements failed to materialize. The Luftwaffe, outnumbered and outclassed, could offer little air support. The dreams of a last-minute victory evaporated. The Elbe River represented the only hope for Wenck's beleaguered army. Across the river lay the American lines, a sanctuary from the storm. But the bridges were under constant bombardment. Time was running out. Wenck knew he had to act fast to lead his men towards the Elbe. The fate of his army rested on his shoulders, their hopes and fears intertwined with his own. Panic spread as the reality of their situation sank in. The order to retreat was now a matter of life or death. The roads leading westward became a torrent of humanity. Horse-drawn carts competed with battered military vehicles for space. The wounded stumbled along, desperate to reach the safety of the Elbe bridges. At the river's edge, chaos reigned. The bridges groaned under the weight of thousands desperate to escape. Soviet artillery shells targeted the fleeing columns. German engineers struggled to repair the shattered spans. Wenck rallied his men, urging them onward. He knew that every hour of delay meant thousands more lost. He had made a promise to his men to lead them to safety. He would honor that promise, even if it meant sacrificing himself. The fate of the lost army rested on his shoulders. Not all were fortunate enough to reach the Elbe bridges. Thousands were trapped behind enemy lines as the Iron Curtain descended. Some attempted to blend in with the civilian population. Others formed small, clandestine resistance groups. Their stories became part of the folklore of post-war Germany. The farmer who sheltered a wounded soldier in his barn. The young woman who guided a group of escaped prisoners through the Soviet lines. The old soldier who lived out his days in quiet obscurity. The lost army became a symbol of the futility of war. Their sacrifice serves as a poignant reminder of the human cost of conflict. Their memory, preserved in whispers, serves as a timeless reminder of the enduring power of the human spirit. Their stories are a testament to the enduring hope for peace. The guns fell silent. An eerie quiet descended upon the shattered cityscape of Berlin. The once proud capital of the Third Reich lay in ruins. The air, thick with the stench of death and decay, hung heavy. The silence was deceptive, for beneath the surface the city was a seething cauldron of shock, despair, and resentment. The Nazi flags had vanished, replaced by white flags of surrender. The streets were now the domain of dazed civilians. The weight of defeat pressed down upon them. Germany lay prostrate, its infrastructure shattered, its economy in ruins. The cities were skeletal reminders of their former glory. The factories stood silent, their chimneys cold and lifeless. The transportation network lay in tatters. The psychological scars ran deep within the soul of the nation. The official surrender marked the end of the war and the beginning of a new chapter in German history. The Allied powers assumed control of a nation that had plunged the world into darkness. For the German people, the realization of defeat was a bitter truth to confront. The weight of responsibility for the horrors of the Nazi regime pressed down upon them. The revelations of the concentration camps sickened and shamed the nation. The world demanded justice and accountability. The Nuremberg trials would soon begin, bringing the architects of the Nazi genocide to account. The Allied occupation brought its own set of challenges. Germany, divided into 4 zones of occupation, became a microcosm of the emerging Cold War. The seeds of division would shape Germany's destiny for decades to come. Amidst the ruins, a desperate search for loved ones commenced. Families clung to fading photographs and scraps of information. The Red Cross worked tirelessly to reconnect families. Women lined up for hours outside makeshift information centers. The lucky ones, reunited with loved ones, embraced with tears of joy. For others, the search continued, the unanswered questions a heavy burden. The psychological toll of the war ran deep. The survivors struggled to come to terms with the trauma they had endured. The physical wounds might heal, but the psychological scars would linger for generations. The ghosts of war haunted their dreams. And as the dust settled, a new global order began to take shape. The wartime alliance between the Western Allies and the Soviet Union began to unravel. The Iron Curtain descended across Europe, splitting Germany in two. In the West, a massive reconstruction effort began under the Marshall Plan. In the East, the communist ideology took root. The seeds of division would blossom into a decades-long standoff between 2 superpowers. Germany became the focal point of this ideological struggle. The battle for Berlin might be over, but the battle for Germany was just beginning. The citizens were caught in the crossfire of a Cold War. The Battle of Berlin stands as a symbol of the destructive power of unchecked ambition. It marked the end of a global conflict and the beginning of a new era. The echoes of those final days remind us of the fragility of peace. The physical scars of the battle have long since healed. The Reichstag stands as a symbol of German unity. The Brandenburg Gate serves as a gateway to a reunited Berlin. Yet the ghosts of the past linger. The Battle of Berlin reminds us that the true cost of war extends far beyond the battlefield. It is a reminder that the seeds of conflict are often sown in fear and unchecked ambition. The spectre of Adolf Hitler, the architect of such unimaginable suffering, still haunts the corridors of history, a chilling reminder of the dangers of unchecked ideology, the seductive allure of charisma, and the ease with which fear and resentment can be manipulated for nefarious ends. The world watched in horror as a nation, once a beacon of culture and enlightenment, descended into the abyss of barbarism, its people seduced by promises of national greatness and racial purity. The lessons of the Nazi era, so painfully learned, must never be forgotten. The world must remain vigilant against the resurgence of extremism, against the seductive whispers of hatred and intolerance. We must guard against the temptation to demonize the other, to seek scapegoats for our problems, to surrender our critical thinking to the siren song of populism and division. The price of apathy, as history has shown, is far too high. The fight against intolerance, against discrimination and prejudice is a battle that must be fought every day in our classrooms, in our communities, and in the halls of power. We must teach our children to think critically, to question authority, and to embrace diversity. We must challenge hate speech wherever we encounter it and stand up for the rights of all people, regardless of race, religion, or ethnicity. Amidst the ruins of Berlin, glimmers of hope emerged, testaments to the enduring strength of the human spirit. Acts of kindness and courage flickered like candles in the darkness. Unsung heroes risked their lives, shared rations and offered comfort. Their stories remind us that hope can blossom even in desolation. The Battle of Berlin stands as a stark reminder of the fragility of peace. The pursuit of peace is an active, ongoing struggle. It demands courage, compassion, and belief in human dignity. The battle for peace must never end. Confront prejudices, challenge injustice, and build bridges. Commit to a world free from war. Let Berlin's legacy remind us of our mission's urgency.